Hi guys, and welcome to another tactical video. This one's going to be for Sisters of Battle, and I'm going to be talking about Retributors as a heavy support option. Now, as with all things Sisters, or Adepta Sororitas as we're now called, our heavy support options are quite limited. So what that means is, as one of three options, Retributors are quite a common sight on the battlefield, and for those who don't know, they're basically our equivalent of Space Marine Devastators. So, as it is, they're a very static unit. They tend to sit back in cover and just shoot, and as a result they actually tend to be more of a support fire unit, and the reasons for this are basically their weapons choice. There's only three types of weapons they can actually take. There are the multi-meltas that you can see here, obviously for anti-tank. There's the heavy bolters that you can see here, and there's also heavy flamers. Now I'm going to go through each option briefly and explain how it should be used, and then I'm going to say which is my personal favourite and how I would run them, and that kind of thing. So here we go. First off, we'll start with the multi-meltas, which are here. Multi-meltas on infantry are generally not a good option, and the reasons are obvious. It's snap firing if you move. It's 24-inch range. Even though it has good anti-tank, its really good anti-tank options only come in the 12-inch range. And if you're snap firing to get in there, then you're not actually doing that good. And if you think about it, a normal melta gun also has that 12-inch threat range because you get to move 6 inches and then fire at full ballistic skill. So if you are basically taking it for anti-tank duties, you're actually better off with a normal melta gun, because at least then you can move if you need to and shoot at that further range at full ballistic skill. So you're actually getting the more options there, and of course you could even assault afterwards. So multi-melta wise, the best platform for it is a vehicle such as the Immolator with its twin linked one. Now it's a shame in many ways, and you can actually use multi-meltas on Retributors for area denial. So you could sit them back in the middle of the board and dare your opponent to come close with his tanks and that kind of thing. But the truth is that they're not really hardy enough for that kind of thing, and if an opponent actually wants them gone, they're not going to do much to stop it, whether they're in cover or not, against a properly equipped opponent. So they are quite vulnerable, and they're also very slow and narrow in their field of what they can actually accomplish, and as a result I don't think they're a very good choice. Now you could also put them on a command squad, multi-melta this is, but again they suffer from the same kind of problems. In the previous decks their Act of Faith gave them Relentless, which made them a lot better, but still they struggled, and so as a result there are much better melta platforms in the Sisters decks. And I honestly don't really see a benefit on putting multi-meltas on any kind of infantry if you can help it. Now, the Retributor's Act of Faith is also rending, which again does next to nothing. It gives you a little bit extra for your multi-melta, but honestly, it's not worth it. It's already anti-tank enough. Anything else is just overkill, so really I wouldn't bother putting multi-meltas on. So what to do if you have multi-melta models like me? Well, keep them, obviously. They may get more useful in the future, who knows. And in the meantime I just run them as other melta guns. I just run them as counts-size meltas. So fairly straightforward there. Heavy flamers. Heavy flamers change the Retributor squad and its role incredibly compared to the others. So if you put heavy flamers on, generally you'll want a transport because the range is so short, and basically what they get is potentially rending heavy flamers, which is amazing, as you can imagine, because it ignores cover, and any 6s to wound will go through armour as well. Excuse me. So what you can do is give them a transport, put them in it, and just charge up the field and roast elite infantry or smaller infantry, basically infantry obviously. If you put them in an immolator, then you could get the full 4 heavy flamers and put a multi-melta on the immolator, and then that can pop the tanks, and then they can roast what's inside, which is a nice way to do it. Now again, the drawback is that although vehicles did get more survivable in 7th, the squad itself would be quite small and thus a bit less survivable. They're unlikely to be in cover if they get popped out. Their range is extremely short, and although they have very good anti-infantry rolls, so does the rest of your army. So you would be dedicating a precious heavy support slot to pure anti-infantry. And even though they can take on elite infantry through weight of dice and also the rending, in my experience, basically the rending does not go off nearly enough, or not reliably enough, and there are ways to compensate for that, but it costs a lot more points. It doesn't go off enough to actually make it reliable, and as such you may put them in front of a bunch of Terminators, get tons of coverage, you're going to get loads of dice if this hits, and then you roll your act of faith and you fail, and you're like, oh great, and then you may have a re-roll or something. No, you fail, okay? And then brilliant, so suddenly they're still getting their 2-up saves, and, or even if it goes off, and then suddenly you don't roll any 6s to wound, it happens. And then they still get their armour saves, and you'll do next to nothing, and those Terminators are going to murder that squad next turn, and that's quite a lot of points dedicated in there, especially if you went for the extra rending. So it can work, but really there are much better options in dealing with those situations. So rending on a heavy flamer isn't as good as it could be, although there are certain situations obviously where it's going to really make a difference, but those situations are so niche. Okay, and so finally we'll go to the heavy bolters, which is the option I prefer to run. Basically heavy bolters, rending heavy bolters. Brilliant. These guys do get sit back, and they can sit in cover obviously because they have a much greater range. They all get a decent amount of shots, that kind of thing, and with rending they can punch through armour if they need to, but otherwise they're basically there as a support fire unit. And that is true of Retributors, really. They're always going to be a support fire unit, so that means they're not going to kill things on their own, they're not going to wipe squads on their own. They need backup, and basically they're really good for this because of their range, and that is a very precious commodity in a sister's army, because we are really hurting for range, and honestly these heavy bolters are our second longest ranged weapons we have. So having them as rending and able to shoot every turn if positioned correctly, that kind of thing, is very nice. So what you really want to do is combine them with a Battle Sister squad, so the Battle Sister squad can open up on an enemy infantry unit, and then these girls can also shoot that same unit, and you'll either cripple the unit enough or just outright destroy it. So it's very good at sweeping objectives in the midfield, that kind of thing. Just combine arms, that kind of thing. And they're also much more likely to survive because they're so far back. And again, they're still only heavy bolters, so it's one of the cheaper setups you could have. No, excuse me. The thing with Retributors as a whole is they took... they're one of the units that took one of the biggest nerfs with the new codex. And the reason is they got more expensive in a way. Their heavy bolters got more expensive. The fact that you have to upgrade the Sister Superior to get the leadership bonus makes them more expensive, and it hurts a little more because these girls are always going to be pretty much in your backfield, and as a result they're much more likely to run off, and obviously they don't want to run anywhere because then they'd be snap firing, so it hurts them more to fail morale, that kind of thing. So basically you want them as static as possible, and so they got more expensive in that sense. And of course they took the nerf as well, because rending as an active faith is brilliant, and previously they could do that every turn. Now they can only do it once if they pass. And yeah, you can pay more points to make them do it twice. There are ways to make them do it 3 times, but then you really are forking out the points for this squad. For a support fire squad, it's not really worth it. So it definitely hurts a lot more than this. And the reason you feel the pain more with Retributors than you do with other squads' active faiths changes is the fact that because they're at the back and surviving for longer, you notice those turns where they don't have rending like they used to. So yeah, this isn't to say they aren't still useful. The range from the heavy bolters is worth it alone. The fact that they can combine with your other units to help wipe them, that kind of thing, makes them very, very useful. Just remember, they're not really going to kill anything on their own unless it's already weak, or that it only has a 4-up armor save, and then you're really going to do a number on them. Excuse me. So there is another option that you could take, and that is basically the fact that they start with rending bolters and bolt pistols, and of course grenades. So you could just take a bare bones one with bolters, use them aggressively because everything is scoring now in 7th edition, and then they have rending bolters, which is pretty nice. Remember, they still need to pass their act of faith. It still has to go off, but if it does go off, it's pretty nice. Again, I would say that's more of a support fire unit, but given at the right time, that kind of thing, it could be very, very damaging to certain opponents. So definitely nice to have. The other thing is they've taken a slight nerf now, very, very slight nerf, in 7th edition, is because rending has changed versus vehicles. So where previously they were AP2 versus vehicles, they no longer. They still get the extra D3 on armor pen, but it's not AP2 anymore, so they can't actually blow up vehicles unless it's open-topped at all. So basically it's going to be glancing, and it always was. So in a sense you don't really need that rending, because the kind of things vehicles you would target them against were probably able to be glanced anyway, so there you go. Yeah, not really much more to say. Retribute is a solid heavy support choice, because you kind of know what you're going to get in the range and survivability of heavy bolters. I would avoid the multi-melta ones, and the heavy flamer option, again, it's a known commodity, which is good to have. The problem is they are reliant on their active faith to do serious damage themselves, and all too often it will fail unless you pump in more points there, and then they're very vulnerable. So honestly, keep them cheap, keep them out of the way. If they die, they die, but use them as support fire, basically. Don't always pick them as your first heavy support choice, because there may be better options. Sometimes not taking heavy support at all is a better option in smaller points games. So yeah, that's pretty much a bit about Retributors. Try them out if you haven't already. They're very effective, especially for range and weight of dice, but just don't expect too much from them on their own, unless you have very hot dice, and in which case, please send me some too. Thank you. Thanks for watching.